The influence of the Islamic world to the history of glass is reflected by its distribution around the world, from Europe to China, and from Russia to East Africa. Islamic glass developed a unique expression that was characterized by the introduction of new techniques and the innovation of old traditions. Roman and Sasanian influences. Islamic glass did not begin to develop a recognizable expression until the late 8th or early 9th century AD, despite Islam spreading across the Middle East and North Africa during the mid-7th century AD. Despite bringing enormous religious and socio-political changes to the region, this event appears to have not drastically affected the day-to-day workings of craft industries, nor did it cause extensive destruction or long-lasting disruption. The Roman and Sasanian glassmaking industries continued in much the same way they had for centuries earlier. Following the unification of the entire region, the interaction of ideas and techniques was facilitated, allowing for the fusion of these two separate traditions with new ideas, ultimately leading to the Islamic glass industry. Roman glassmaking traditions that are important in the Islamic period include the application of glass trails as a surface embellishment, while stylistic techniques adopted from the Sasanian Empire include various styles of glass cutting. This may have developed out of the long-standing hard stone carving traditions in Persia and Mesopotamia. In regards to glass-making technology, tank furnaces used in the Levant to produce slabs of raw glass for export during the Classical period were used during the early Islamic period in the same region until the 10th or 11th centuries AD. Technological change. During the first centuries of Islamic rule, glassmakers in the eastern Mediterranean continued to use the Roman recipe consisting of calcium-rich sand and mineral natron from the Wadi el-Natron in Egypt, and examples of natron-based Islamic glass have been found in the Levant up to the late 9th century AD. Archaeological evidence has shown that the use of natron ceased, and plant ash became the source of soda for all Islamic glass in the following centuries. The reasons for this technological transition remain unclear, although it has been postulated that civil unrest in Egypt during the early 9th century AD led to a cut-off in the natron supply, thus forcing Islamic glassmakers to look for alternate soda sources. Evidence of experimentation with the basic glass recipe at Beth She'arim during the early 9th century AD further supports this argument. A glass slab made from a tank mold from the site contained an excess amount of lime, and may be the result of mixing sand with plant ash. Although the raw glass would have been unusable due to its composition, it does suggest that at this time, Islamic glassmakers in the Levant were combining aspects of Sasanian and Roman traditions in an effort to solve the problem created by the lack of access to mineral natron. The use of plant ash, specifically from halophytic plants, which were plentiful in the Middle East due to the climate, was well known in Persia and Mesopotamia. It undoubtedly would not take long for the glassmakers in the Near East to correct their manufacturing errors and begin using the plant ash-based recipe used further east. Early Islamic glass mid-7th to late 12th century AD. The glass industry in the early Islamic period can initially be characterized as a continuation of older traditions, coinciding with the Umayyad Caliphate, the first Islamic dynasty. Following the rise of the Abbasid Caliphate in 750 AD, the capital of the Islamic world was moved from Damascus in the Levant to Baghdad in Mesopotamia. This led to a cultural shift away from the influences of classical traditions, and allowed for the development of an Islamic expression. The production of glass during this period is concentrated in three main regions of the Islamic world. Firstly, the Eastern Mediterranean remained a center of glass production, as it had been for centuries. Excavations at Kala Seman in northern Syria, Tyre in Lebanon, Beth She'arim and Bet Eliezer in Israel, and at Fustat in Egypt have all shown evidence for glass production, including numerous vessels, raw glass, and their associated furnaces. Also adding to our understanding of the glass industry in this region is the aforementioned shipwreck at Suleiman, in Persia, a formerly Sasanian region. Archaeological activity has located a number of sites with large deposits of early Islamic glass, including Nishapur, Saraf, and Susa. Numerous kilns suggest Nishapur was an important production center, and the identification of a local type of glass at Saraf suggests the same for that site. In Mesopotamia, excavations at Samarra, a temporary capital of the Abbasid Caliphate during the mid-9th century AD, produced a wide range of glass vessels, while work at Al-Madain and Raqqa provide evidence for glass production in the region. However, it is difficult to clearly identify the place in which a glass piece was manufactured without the presence of wastes, which indicate that the location was a site of glassmaking. Furthermore, during the Abbasid Caliphate, both glassmakers and the products moved throughout the empire, leading to dispersion of glassware and universality of style, which further prevents the identification of a piece's birthplace. As the Seljuk Empire arose from Seljuk generals conquering lands under the Abbasid flag only nominally, it is likely that glass technology, style, and trade might have continued similarly under the Seljuks as it did under the Abbasids. Despite the increasing ability and style of Islamic glassmakers during this time, few pieces were signed or dated, making identification of a piece's location of origin unfortunately difficult. Glass pieces are typically dated by stylistic comparisons to other pieces from the era. The majority of the decorative traditions used in the early Islamic period concerned the manipulation of the glass itself, and included trail application, carving, and mold blowing. As mentioned previously, glass carving and trail application are a continuation of older techniques, the former associated with Sasanian glassmaking and the latter with Roman traditions. In relief cutting, a specialized form of glass carving most often used on colorless and transparent glass, the area surrounding the decorative elements was carved back to the ground, thus leaving the former in relief. Unlike relief cutting, trail application, or thread trailing, allowed decoration with hot glass. The glass blower would manipulate molten glass while still malleable and create patterns, handles, or flanges. While cutting reached the height of its popularity from the 9th–11th centuries CE, thread trailing became more widely used during the 11th–12th centuries, when Seljuk glass makers were considered at the height of the skill. Mold blowing, based on Roman traditions from the 1st century CE, is another specialized technique that spread widely throughout the Islamic Mediterranean world during this period. Two distinct types of molds are known archaeologically: a two-part mold made up of separate halves, and the dip mold, whereby the viscous glass is placed entirely inside one mold. The molds were often made of bronze, although there are examples of some being ceramic. Molds also typically mold that often included a carved pattern. The finished piece would take on the shape and style of the mold. With these advances in glassmaking technology, artisans began to stylize and simplify the designs, emphasizing designs with no foreground or background, and plain but beautiful vessels. A final decorative technology that is a distinct marker of the early Islamic period is the use of luster painting. While some scholars see this as a purely Islamic invention originating in Fustat, others place the origins of luster decoration in Roman and Coptic Egypt during the centuries preceding the rise of Islam. Staining glass vessels with copper and silver pigments was known from around the 3rd century AD, although true luster technology probably began sometime between the 4th and 8th centuries AD. Luster painting on glass involves the application of copper and silver pigments, followed by a specific firing that allows for the ionic exchange of Ag+ and Cu+ with the glass, resulting in a metallic sheen fully bound to the vessel, regardless of its specific origins. Luster decoration was a key technology in glass production that continued to develop throughout the early Islamic period, and spread not only geographically, but also to other material industries in the form of glazed ceramics. Middle Islamic glass, late 12th to late 14th century AD. This is the golden age of Islamic glassmaking. Despite the fractious nature of the Islamic world, Persia and Mesopotamia came under control of the Seljuk Turks, and later the Mongols, while in the eastern Mediterranean, the Ayyubid and Mamluk dynasties held sway. Furthermore, this period saw European interruptions into the Middle East due to the Crusades. Glass production seemingly ceased to exist in Persia and Mesopotamia, and little is known about the reasons for this. However, in the earlier part of this period, there is evidence for glass making in Central Asia, for example at Kuva in modern Uzbekistan. This tradition presumably ended with the Mongol invasions of the mid-13th century that destroyed other sites in the region. The glass-producing regions of Syria and Egypt continued their industries. It is for the materials excavated and produced at sites such as Samsat in southern Turkey, Aleppo and Damascus in Syria, Hebron in the Levant, and Cairo that this period is referred to as the Golden Age of Islamic glass. The Middle Islamic period is characterized by the perfection of various polychrome decorative traditions, the most important of which are marbling, enameling, and gilding, while relief carving and luster painting seemingly fell out of fashion. Marbling involves applying a continuous trail of opaque glass around the body of a glass object. This trail may then be manipulated by pulling it, creating a characteristic wavy pattern. The object was then rolled on a marver to work the trail into the glass vessel itself. This technique, used on a variety of glass objects from bowls and bottles to chess pieces, was introduced around the late 12th century AD, but is in fact a revival of a much older glass working tradition that has its origins in the late Bronze Age in Egypt. Gilding during this period involved applying small amounts of gold in suspension onto a glass body, followed by a low firing to fuse the two materials, and was adopted from Byzantine traditions. This technique was often combined with enameling, the application of ground glass with a colorant, to traditional and new vessel forms, and represents the height of Islamic glassmaking. Enameling, a resurrection of older techniques, was first practiced in the Islamic world at Raqqa during the late 12th century, but also spread to Cairo during Mamluk rule. A study of various enameled vessels, including beakers and mosque lamps, suggests that there are two subtle yet distinct firing practices, possibly representing two distinct production centers of glass working traditions. Due to its high demand, enameled glass was exported throughout the Islamic world, Europe, and China during this period. Enameling eventually ended in Syria and Egypt following disruption by various Mongol invasions from the 13th through to the 15th centuries AD. A final note on glass from the Middle Islamic period is the increased interaction between the Middle East and Europe. The Crusades allowed for the European discovery of Islamic gilded and enameled vessels. The goblet of the Eight Princes brought to France from the Levant is one of the earliest examples of this technique. Furthermore, large amounts of raw plant ash were exported solely to Venice, fueling that city's glass industries. It was also in Venice that enameling was resurrected following its decline in the Islamic world. Late Islamic glass 15th to mid-19th century AD. The late Islamic period is dominated by three main empires and areas of glass production: the Ottomans in Turkey, the Safavid dynasty in Persia, and the Mughals in northern India. The most important overriding characteristic of glass production in this period is the direct influence of European glass, and, in particular, that of Venice, Bohemia, and the Dutch. The production of high-quality fine glass essentially ended in Egypt, Syria, and Persia, and it was only in India during the 17th century that Islamic glass regained a high level of artistic expression following European influence. The lack of court patronage for glassmaking and the high quality of European glass lead contributed to a decline in the industry. However, utilitarian glass was still being made in the traditional centers. Historical documents and accounts, such as the Surname-i Humayun, show the presence of glassmaking and a glassmakers' guild in Istanbul, as well as production at Beykoz on the coast of the Bosphorus in the Ottoman Empire. The glass made at these centers was not of great quality and was highly influenced by Venetian and Bohemian styles and techniques. In Persia, evidence for glassmaking following the Mongol invasions of the 13th century does not reappear until the Safavid period. European travelers wrote accounts of glass factories in Shiraz, and it is thought that transplanted Italian craftsmen brought about this revival. No significant decorative treatments or technical characteristics of glass were introduced or revived during this period in Persia. Bottle and jug forms with simple applied or ribbed decoration, made from colored transparent glass, were common, and are linked to the Shirazi wine industry. Mughal glass making in India, on the other hand, saw a return to the enamelling and gilding traditions from the Middle Islamic period, as well as the glass carving techniques used in Persia during the earliest centuries of the Islamic world. Glass workshops and factories were initially found near the Mughal capital of Agra, Patna, and in Gujarat province, and by the 18th century had spread to other regions in western India. New forms were introduced using these older Islamic glass working techniques, and of these, nargileh bases became the most dominant. Square bottles based on Dutch forms, decorated with enamelling and gilding in Indian motifs, are another important expression in Mughal glassmaking, and were produced at Bhuj, Kutch, and in Gujarat. Ethnographic study of current glass production in Jalisa shows fundamental similarities between this site and the early Islamic tank furnaces found in the Levant, despite differences in the shape of the structures, highlighting the technological continuity of the glass industry throughout the Islamic period. Roles of Islamic glass. While the various functions of Islamic glass have been touched upon during the previous discussion, glass filled a multitude of roles throughout the history of the Islamic world. A variety of vessel forms used to hold a wide range of materials make up the bulk of glass objects, and have seen the most attention from Islamic glass scholars. Some of the more distinct vessel functions from the Islamic period include inkwells, kumkum perfume sprinklers, and vessels associated with Islamic science and medicine such as alembics, test tubes, and cuppas. Glass was also used for aesthetic purposes in the form of decorative figurines, and for jewelry as bracelets and beads. The bracelets, in particular, may prove to be an important archaeological tool in the dating of Islamic sites. Glass also filled various utilitarian roles, with evidence of use as windows and as coin weights. The variety of functions filled by glass and the sheer bulk of the material found through excavation further highlights its significance as a distinct and highly developed material industry throughout the Islamic world. Study of Islamic glass. Islamic glass from this period has been given relatively little attention by scholars. One exception to this was the work carried out by Carl J. Lamb. Lamb catalogued and classified the glass finds from important Islamic sites, for example Susa in Iran, and its Samarra in Iraq. One of the most important discoveries in the field of Islamic glass was a shipwreck dated to around 1036 AD on the Turkey coast at Suleiman. The recovered cargo included vessel fragments and glass cullet exported from Syria. The significance of these finds lies in the information they can tell us about the production and distribution of Islamic glass. Despite this, the majority of studies have concentrated on stylistic and decorative classification, and as such technological aspects of the industry, as well as undecorated vessels and objects, have often been overlooked within the field. This, in particular, is frustrating because the majority of glass finds during the Islamic period are undecorated and used for utilitarian purposes.